So with this, we start the second part of the plenary session. We are way over time, but I have been allowed 15 minutes extra at the end. That means we have about 50 minutes left out of the 1 hour that we were originally assigned. So the subject is sustainable financing for sustainable utilities. The emphasis is on sustainable financing, where the assumption is that there is a common understanding about what sustainable utilities are, and that means utilities that probably do water supply and sanitation, that do not only provide access but also service, and that also take care of the discharge of unwanted substances in the environment and so on. So that's a big task for the utilities, and then the bigger task is how do they do that in a sustainable manner, and particularly how do they do that on the side of the financing. And we know that financing in the present situation is already a challenge for many of the utilities. So with this sort of added responsibilities, it will only become a bigger challenge, but that challenge has to be met, because if there isn't enough money to fund your operation and maintenance costs, you'll be cannibalizing your assets, and that will make the service provision only get worse. So we have to meet at least the goal of revenues meeting expenses, but of course we also want to continue investing, particularly if we think about SDG 6. So this is quite a difficult area to think through, and that's why we have a big panel who will share their thoughts with us. And I hope, and I have also arranged the session such that there'll be enough time for us to talk with the audience, because what we have here is a panel that is consisting exclusively of those who finance water projects, no operators, no civil society. So if they want to give their views on the subject, they need to be given time. So I will, in a way, restrict the time taken by the financiers so that there's enough time to interact with the audience. All right, so what we're going to do is, I'll introduce myself. My name is Maarten Blokland. I was a professor of water services management at UNESCO IHE. I worked with a consulting engineering firm, and I also worked with the water utility a long time ago, because I've since all that retired, and I'm now enjoying my pension. But you have, so I'll introduce the panelists one by one as they speak. What we have done is we've asked them to reflect on a number of questions, because it's a very broad subject. So before you know it, we are going anywhere and nowhere. So we've asked them to reflect on a number of questions, and not to try and answer all of them, but some of them. And the questions are, they should be up on the screen. What are some of the internal, so two diagnostic questions. What are some of the internal reasons that many utilities are struggling financially? Then 2, what are some of the external reasons that so many utilities are struggling financially? And then the 3rd and 4th and 5th one are more towards solutions. Which key measures are required to ensure sustainable utilities? 4, what are the sustainable sources of funding for sustainable utilities? So this, you could say, the core question. And then, in terms of innovation, are there new, less conventional funding approaches that should be looked at or should be considered? Okay, so these questions have been put to the panelists, and they have, each of them has reflected on a few of them, and this is what they will present. They'll be given 3 minutes for the presentation of their answers to these questions, times 6 panelists, that's 20 minutes, plus my introduction. That's half an hour, and then hopefully we'll have 20 minutes left for interaction with the audience. All right. So in the order in which they're presented in the program, the first one to present is Dick van Ginhoven. And Dick van Ginhoven is a senior advisor water and sanitation at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Directorate General in International Cooperation of the Netherlands. So he will speak first, and then I'll introduce the next speaker as that speaker gets the floor. Thank you very much.
Okay, Martin, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. In about 10 days, your life will completely change. In 10 days, the UN, the heads of state, will come together in New York and set new goals for your work, for your assignments, for your operator, for your company. The new goals, SDG number 6, are all about universal access. Everybody should have access to water and sanitation in 15 years' time. So here we go. Those of you who are not yet retired, who are planning to retire, the next 15 years you will be put on the spot. I think it's good that I start with this because this is a very important thing. It's not about universal access only, it's also about water quality and integrated water resource management. And let's not forget all sanitation, sewerage, solid waste, these issues we have to deal with. So we have to get out of our comfort zone, and I'm going to challenge you today to get out of your comfort zone. We have to change working the way we are doing, otherwise we are not going to reach our goals. Within 10 days, over 10 days' time, your minister will be asking you, members of parliament will ask you, the public, the consumers will ask you, how are you as operators going to make it happen? Universal access to water and sanitation for everybody in your country, in your area. How are you going to do it? How are you going to finance it? Let's talk about money. Let's talk about the dirty thing, money. How many chief financial officers are today in the room? Can they just stand up? None. One. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I think that's a pity, to be frank, because the real change, the way we do business, has to be how we learn to adapt to a changing financing environment, a changing economy, a change the way we can finance our water investments. I'm going to explain. First of all, let me congratulate Farage and his team and all of you with the excellent reports I've been seeing yesterday. They call it PIP, Performance Improvement Plan. It's fantastic. But I'd like to make a few remarks on it, because this is the way you think you want to change your company. Interesting thing, what came to my mind, I'm particularly referring to Kenya and Ghana, Nairobi and Accra. The budget was in dollars. Very interesting. Why is that? Why not shillings? Why not cedis? I'm making the point because to my mind, unconsciously, this reflects the way maybe you're thinking about financing it. Will there be IDA money coming? Will there be grant money coming? Dollar money, euro money? Or will there maybe a sub-sovereign loan by KfW that will be translated in a grant to your company? Things like that. So I think the point I try to make, if we want to build sustainable companies, from now on, let's plan and think in local currency. The time of ODA is going to be over very soon. ODA is not going to change the world. Yeah, just going to be more than 3 minutes. Is that what you mean? I thought, you know, if you come to Barcelona only for 3 minutes, then I better stay home. I mean, but on the other hand, I also would like to share some of the ideas that you know, I'm coming across when I meet with colleagues of donor countries. It's ODA is going to turn down. If we want to invest universal access, Jeffrey Sachs, about $27 billion annual investment for the next 15 years. That's a hell of money. Still, it can be done. But ODA is not going to do it. The World Bank, African Development Bank, don't have that money. The IDA ceilings will not do it. So we have to really look at different sources of finance. The point I try to make is we have to look to domestic resources, domestic resource mobilization. If you drive in Accra, if you drive in Kenya, you can see there's a hell lot of money in Nairobi. Hell lot of money. You see all these Porsches, Toyotas, this four-wheel drive. You go to the most beautiful shopping malls you can imagine, most beautiful apartment buildings. Now, who's financing that? This is local money, local currency. Most probably, a lot of it comes from the pension funds and insurance companies. So here we see that we have a capital market that we have to tap into. We have to learn how to mobilize the capital market, mobilize funding from the capital market for our sector. And I think that's a big, big challenge.
Thank you very much, Dick. I think that is... That's a very important point.
Yeah.
So, and I think it should be enough for this discussion. So what you're saying is that you should forget, well, not forget, but we should take into consideration that the money will not automatically come in the form of grants or cheap loans. We have to find other sources of money. Okay. That's your, there's other people that want their 1 minute of time. So we have to stick to the 3 minutes for the panelists, I think. Okay. So the next speaker will be Mekuria Asafo. I'm not sure I do the pronunciation right. He is a chief financial analyst at the Operations, Water and Sanitation Department of the African Development Bank. And Mr. Assefa has the floor, and he will also be given his 3 minutes of fame.
Okay, thank you so much. I would like to start the discussion by showing you, or by bringing to your attention, a few decades ago, the telecom as well as the power sector, look at it. We were using a lot of government funds to finance those projects, those operations in the sector. But now they are fully, in the private sector. What's the reason behind? Because they have become more cost-effective and sustainable. Therefore, the question that I would like to ask to the audience is there opportunity also for the water and sanitation sector also to be transformed into a way it is more cost-effective and efficient? If it is so, then that means it will have its own sustainable and cost-effective business plan. Then the issue of funding will not be an issue, because look now, the telecom, the private sector, the business people, everybody goes and finance it without the need to come to DFIs and asking the governments for financing. Therefore, I think what I want to highlight is it's very, very important that we need to reflect and make the sector more viable, more sustainable by making it more cost-effective. And we need to move away from the three T's, that is from financing the sector through a blend of tariff, tax, and transfers, to a single T, that is user fees and tariffs. But this has to be also cost-effective. If there is an efficient service provider, then there is no issue of sourcing funds. Of course, there are areas, or for instance, in the rural areas or in the peri-urban areas, then we can use some of the water funds to finance those concessional areas, so that to transfer them or to gradually transfer them into a viable kind of operation. So what are the innovative then approaches in financing the sector, assuming that the sector has been transformed into effective and cost-effective and sustainable service? Therefore, then once these services are effective, then there are a list of potential financing mechanisms. There would be the bond market, the capital market, as my colleague explained, the pension funds and others. They are sitting with a lot of money. So they want to invest it only if there are sustainable and cost-effective investments. Then we can go also directly to commercial banks, can issue water bonds, and we can also, I want to highlight also the need also promote also public-private partnerships in the sector. So this can be, we can have valid partnerships only if the sector has transformed itself into cost-effective. Therefore, in my conclusion, I want to highlight that it's very important that we transform the sector by making it more cost-effective and having a bankable and a robust business plan, which eventually we go with that business plan, ask for private sector or any commercial bank, which they would be ready to finance it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Can I then ask Walid Mehailen, who is the Senior Technical Assistance Officer of the OPEC Fund for International Development, to share his reflections on the questions with us. Please.
Thank you very much. Well, if we really believe that domestic resource mobilization will help bridge the financing gap, some of us will be out of business very soon. Nevertheless, well, I personally believe that whereas indeed we should look at a combination of traditional sources of financing, including ODA, including tariffs, because very often water and sanitation services are still seen as free in many countries, and I still believe that I have actually reservations about the possibility to tap the financial markets to finance this type of, especially if we're talking about infrastructures. Because, I mean, whereas there is a consensus, while there is a consensus today that users have to pay for these services, I mean, if we look at the reality on the ground in many countries, especially informal settlements in urban areas, people are either unable or unwilling to pay because they are too poor to. So really the dilemma is to find a good compromise between financially sustainable and socially acceptable tariffs, and this is easier to say than to do. Now, if we come back to the role of different stakeholders, I mean, I'm not a sector specialist. By my experience, my interactions with people working in this area is that water utilities in many countries are not do not have much say in the planning of investments or even in the setting tariffs or in the whole financing of the infrastructure. So they're basically entrusted with the responsibility of providing a service, maintaining, operating the infrastructure. So probably if we want to look at the financial sustainability, we have to review, and see how water operators, water and sanitation operators could be more involved in these processes and have more say in this, especially on the financial side, have the means to achieve the, let's say, the very more increasingly demanding targets that are being set for them. Yeah, and as a development finance institution, I believe we still have a role in especially in low middle income countries, in least developed countries, in supporting these efforts. And probably we should shift our attention gradually from exclusively from water to also water sanitation, more integrated approaches, as was indicated by previous presenters. And some other issues like water safety plans and water quality. And I will stop here. I have exceeded my 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. So far the presentations have much in common, although they differ a little bit, but let's listen a bit more. The next speaker will be Antoine Saint-Train. He works with the EU Infrastructure Unit of the Director General for International Cooperation, Development and Water in the water sector, where he is the administrator in charge of the EU water facility. So I should have started with, he works for the EU. Please.
Good morning, all. I'm going to shorten my presentation to keep within the 3 minutes. So the EuropeAid, I'm in charge of the water facility, and the water facility was created in 2004 and endowed with 720 million euros for water and sanitation project. The first tranche of 500 million was funded under the 9 EDF, the EDF being a fund whose contribution by member states is on a voluntary basis and is administered by the European Commission. And then there was the water facility funded by the 10 EDF with 200 million and 12 million from the Spanish government. Just want to mention that. And the process to allocate those funds to projects were through 5 calls of proposals, and one of them was for strengthening water operators. So that was the second call for proposal of the 10 EDF water facility that was launched in 2010. And I'll come straight then to a bit the conclusion or lessons learned from this project we funded. So that call of proposal, we funded 35 projects in ACP countries. And answering the question that was proposed to the panel, maybe just as well, one thing in which I differ from my previous panelists is that most of them were banks, and we are dealing only with grants. And there is, I think, a major difference between a development bank and a donor. But so the first question that we were asked is, what are the internal reasons that make so many utilities struggling financially? And you know, from the different projects we funded, is one of the first one is often personnel, too many, inefficient, poorly motivated, and in some case, just overstaffing is a cost that's sometimes higher than the turnover of the company. Then a very low efficiency of the network, often over 50% of water is lost. I mean, all this is common sense, and often we have been already presented. Then one aspect as well is often a non-adapted technology, in a sense that the investment or the systems may be top of the art, and the technicians are well trained now and know how to handle those systems, but often the logistic and technical chain is not present in the country. And therefore, either the maintenance is not done properly, or if it's done, it has a very high cost. And we often see a rapid deterioration of the equipment. And these systems should be developed in order to be maintained by local resources in terms of personnel, of workshop or spare part, and therefore often less automated than they are. And often water price is too low, and the most important part is the tariff structure is not adapted. And then often there is fraud, and if not plain robbery within the water system, the water institution. The external reason for those utilities struggling financially, says fraud by large water consumers, more than often with the complicity of the water service. State institutions do not pay their due, which can be ministries, military camps, they can be very large, and in some of the project, this consumer can represent up to 40% of the total billing. And then political interference. And I would like here to mention a word that Baystein Mal has said at the last IWA conference in Lisbon, where he says it's enough that the water utilities are politically motivated. In the sense that when he was the Ministry of Water in Gambia, the water utility often are cash-rich structures. He was calling the director of the water utility to ask him to finance whichever thing he needed to be financed. This has to stop. Now, the key measures are required to ensure financially sustainable utilities. From what I received from the different team leaders in the project we finance, is modification of the tariff structures, including a specific arrangement for institution, the externalization of the billing and bill collection. Often try to entrust a bank or a financial institution to do these aspects and not keep it in intern. The reduction of personnel and training of the ones staying, and the physical improvement of the network. And then I would like to mention an interesting comment that was made by several projects, is that the strengthening and reorganization of a water utility needs time. And during that time, it has to be the focus of the utility. But often, these programs to strengthen and to restructure water utility comes with investment project financed by development bank, and often are a program that is aside from the investment. Often as well, those strengthening programs focus on making sure that the investment is successful. And the problem is that the utility then focus their attention onto the investment and making sure the investment happen, and the restructuring and the strengthening of that organization does not happen. And therefore, one of the and it's really a remark that was done by several projects, please give us time. Give us 2-3 years, no investment, to be able to strengthen the structures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that was a different perspective, in fact, answering the first 3 questions. Very good that you took time to enlighten us on the experiences in your projects. The next speaker is sitting next to me, is Natalia Guyon Munoz Repiso. And she's working with the Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation, which is in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will, if you don't mind, I will continue in English due to my strict lack of time. If I only have 3 minutes, I feel more fluent and more quick in Spanish. Así que, si no les importa, voy a continuar en español para poder ajustarme a los 3 minutos. También tiendo a hablar muy rápido. Si hablo muy rápido y no da tiempo a la traducción, me lo avisan, porque quiero aprovechar el tiempo y me embalo. Hemos hablado de financiación sostenible y a mí me gustaría centrar un poco más el foco en la siguiente parte de la sesión, que era financiación sostenible para servicios sostenibles. Yo quisiera hacer un poco de énfasis en esos servicios sostenibles. Servicios más que sistemas, que yo creo que es un concepto más amplio y más global, porque lo que queremos no es que la gente tenga agua y saneamiento, sino que tenga un agua de calidad, que tenga un saneamiento socialmente aceptable, en fin, desde un enfoque de derecho humano, que para eso soy la cooperación española. Y, desde luego, estos servicios sostenibles pasan por operadores sostenibles, así que yo creo que todos hemos hecho bien en venir aquí, aunque solo tuviéramos 3 minutos o 1 minuto para intervenir. Las claves para la sostenibilidad de estos servicios, desde el punto de vista de la cooperación española, las voy a enumerar rápidamente, por si acaso luego no me da tiempo a desarrollarlo, y por lo menos ya he dado el flash, el titular de cada factor que, a nuestro modo de ver, influye en la sostenibilidad. Sería, por un lado, la selección de soluciones viables, soluciones sostenibles y adaptadas a las capacidades. En segundo lugar, el llegar a donde más se necesita, el llegar a los más vulnerables, con esta perspectiva que nos comentaba el compañero de acceso universal, de objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. En tercer lugar, el trabajar con una óptica de servicio, como he dicho antes, un poco más allá de la infraestructura, también la gobernanza, el apoyo a operadores. Por otro lado, un enfoque de derechos humanos, es decir, que no basta con el acceso a agua potable y saneamiento, ¿no? Que hay que ir más allá también de los objetivos de desarrollo del milenio. Subir el foco, no solamente proporcionar un servicio de calidad y eficiente a los usuarios, sino también hablar de gestión integrada del recurso hídrico, protección de fuentes, recursos no convencionales. Por supuesto, un fortalecimiento del sector, que también se ha comentado aquí. El trabajo en políticas y en normativa, y también la capacitación y la gestión del conocimiento. Estos serían factores que me gustaría poder desarrollar, aunque sea mínimamente. En primer lugar, en cuanto a soluciones viables y sostenibles, quería lanzar la pregunta de si hace falta tanta inversión, si hace falta inversión en infraestructuras, o más bien tendríamos que hablar si hay un 40% de agua no facturada y un 30% o un 20% que se pierde, y al final solamente el 30 o el 40% del agua producida está generando ingresos. ¿No sería más lógico hablar de eficiencia, de operación y mantenimiento, de calidad, de llegar a los más pobres y vulnerables, de derecho humano al agua y el saneamiento desde el punto de vista de disponibilidad, de tener agua pero también con una cierta continuidad, en una cierta cantidad, accesible física y económicamente, culturalmente aceptable, la participación de todos los actores? También quisiera hablar brevemente de regulación, ¿no?, que me parece clave. Y luego también que no solamente es el sistema o el servicio el que tiene que ser viable, que tenemos que tener una visión más global. Está claro que el coste de prestación de servicio de agua y saneamiento es menor que el coste sanitario o las pérdidas productivas de no prestar el servicio. Así que hay que tener una visión un poco más global, ¿no?, que seguramente excede al propio operador. Hay que tener también una visión de planificación hidrológica, planeamiento urbanístico, gestión integrada del recurso y del ciclo integral del agua, protección de fuentes, reutilización, recursos no convencionales. Por supuesto, gobernanza del sector y fortalecimiento de la institucionalidad. Desde el punto de vista de políticas, políticas que puedan beneficiar a quienes no tienen acceso o en lo rural, incluso a quienes no pueden pagar para tener el acceso, pues habrá que darles una ayuda desde el Gobierno. Trabajar también en normativas, porque muchas veces queremos mejorar los servicios y ser sostenibles, pero es la propia normativa nacional a la que nos está poniendo cortapisas, para poder buscar unas soluciones adaptadas. A lo mejor hay que, en algunas ocasiones, rebajar los estándares, hay que adaptarse a las capacidades, no podemos hacer unas infraestructuras que luego no se van a poder mantener porque no hay capacidades o recursos económicos o técnicos o humanos. Por otro lado, en la recuperación de costes me gustaría también mencionar rápidamente que habría que hablar de la inversión, si es posible, de la operación y mantenimiento, por supuesto, del funcionamiento, pero también de incluir costes de concienciación, costes de fomento de la capacidad, porque, por ejemplo, en el saneamiento está claro que casi más importante que la infraestructura es el cambio de comportamiento, ¿no? Y para eso hace falta sensibilización y capacitación otra vez, y aquí voy lanzando mensajes que yo creo que van también en la línea de estos temas que estamos tratando estos días, de hermanamiento, operadores, fortalecimiento de capacidades. Y por otro lado, el seleccionar soluciones sostenibles. Nosotros en cada programa o cada actuación que financiamos desde la cooperación española siempre pedimos un plan de sostenibilidad desde el principio, tener en mente esos servicios que estamos generando, cómo van a ser sostenibles a lo largo del tiempo cuando la cooperación española se retire y cuando vaya evolucionando también pues, el crecimiento poblacional, el cambio climático, también trabajamos bastante en adaptación al cambio climático. Y por otro lado, sí, ya súper brevemente, quería mencionar que es muy, muy importante el trabajar en una incidencia política, ¿no? En un diálogo del sector, más allá de programa por programa, servicio por servicio, tener un diálogo institucional y poder incidir en las políticas, en las normativas nacionales, regionales, y también, por supuesto, en capacitación, en gestión del conocimiento. Les invito a todos a visitar nuestra página web o a visitar nuestras oficinas técnicas de cooperación española en casi todos los países, donde podrán informarse sobre todas las acciones que tenemos en materia de capacitación. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. We have one more panelist to go, and that is Mr. Nizar Zayed. He is the acting manager for the Urban Development and Services Division in the Islamic Development Bank. So please share your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mott. Actually, having a family name starting with Z is not an easy task because I'm always the last to speak. And so I have to be creative, innovative, and keep you alive. Quickly, actually, I will try to address the questions about the internal and external reasons for financing and the sustainability of the water utilities. Some of the issues, of course, were mentioned by my colleagues, and particularly with Antoine. And I think for the internal reasons, I will go a step further and say the major problem, in my view, for water utilities is leadership. And all the problems which you see in water utilities come from the leadership. If you have a good leadership, you can have good business plans, you can reduce the revenue water, you can increase the collection ratios, you can reduce staffing, you can do everything, whatever you want. So in my view, leadership is the key word here. And to give you an example, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, Ek Sun Chan, Phnom Penh Supply Water Authority in Cambodia. We all know this gentleman, how he was able in 1993 to turn around the water company in Phnom Penh, and it became a success story. And when he left it in 1996, it was so good, so well managed. So here again, the key word in my view is leadership. Of course, it permeates down to these other issues, inefficiencies, etc. But we know all this. Regarding the financing of the sector, of course, and my colleague Makuria from the African Development Bank mentioned earlier about the 3 T's. You know, we know these: the taxes, tariffs, and the transfers. Let's talk about the tariffs. In water utility, when they usually people go to the regulator and ask for increase in tariffs, the politics comes into the picture. They say, no, we have election in the next 6 months. We cannot increase the tariffs. So the problem here, for the external reasons, I would summarize by saying it's politics. For political reasons, they cannot increase the tariffs. They cannot increase the taxes because we have elections in the next 6 months. So again, it all comes down to the same reason in my view. So what's left, I mean, to finance the water sector, in my view, the local financial markets, they are a very good opportunity to finance the sector because you are borrowing in local currency and you are getting your payments in local currency, the bills. So it's an efficient way to do that. The problem is that in many developing countries, the local financial markets are either inexistent or inefficient. You mentioned earlier, Dick, about the malls in Nairobi or the Mercedes in Tunisia, my country. Or it's true, we have this, but it's all cash. You know, there are no structured financial markets which are efficient, to which the water utilities can address and get the money from there. So so in my view, here the problem goes beyond the water sector. It's about reforming the financial sectors and establishing local financial sectors in different developing countries so that they become efficient and they can provide the necessary resources for the water sector. In conclusion, in my view, a good, well-run and well-managed water utility will never have a problem for financing. Actually, the donors and the bankers will be begging these companies, utilities, to take money from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, according to my watch, we have about 15 minutes left. So my plan was to ask the panelists first to reflect on what the others had said, but I think we'll skip that and we'll go immediately to the audience. So I think the point here, as I said before, is that the only people that speak, and there's nothing wrong with that, are banks and donors, and they may be presenting us with views that the other stakeholders in the audience have different opinions on, or they'd like to take up some of the presenters on what they said. So I have noted that the WOPA stakeholders are operators, the unions, civil society, and then the academia and the NGOs. So what I would like to do is I'd like to invite comments whereby the person that gives a comment or asks a question presents him or herself with a name, organization, and just for all of us to understand which stakeholder group he or she finds him or herself to belong to. And I would like to open, and I would like the person that makes an intervention to, if applicable, to say to whom the question or comment is directed. So, first question. So, can I have some people? Okay, so there's enough, I think, for the remaining 15 minutes. How to do this? So let's just go front to back. Please. Is there a microphone? Can it come to the front? We'll start and go front to back, José Luis.
Samir Ben Saïd, je suis de l'ONEP, ou l'ONI maintenant, du Maroc.
Plus fort.
Donc je représente un opérateur public au Maroc, l'Office national de l'eau potable et de l'électricité. Moi j'ai un commentaire à faire par rapport, ça a été dit un petit peu par le représentant de la Banque islamique de développement. Le mot-clé ici, c'est sustainable finance. So sustainability is le financement durable, la durabilité, c'est très important. C'est le mot-clé. Et on ne peut pas uniquement rely on only donors for sustainability. Donors doivent compléter le financement. Il y a deux éléments importants ces dernières années. D'abord, bien sûr, les SDGs, qui imposent l'application, la généralisation de l'accès à l'eau potable, à l'assainissement dans les 15 prochaines années. Et il y a de fortes chances que ça soit approuvé par les représentants des États et bien sûr des États des pays en développement. Et l'élément important également, c'est le fait que l'Assemblée, enfin la communauté internationale a validé le fait finalement que l'accès à l'eau potable et à l'assainissement sont des droits humains. Et ça, c'est important. Ça doit se traduire, si ces représentants des États, notamment en développement, sont sérieux, puisqu'ils approuvent, ça doit être traduit au niveau de la politique des pays concernés par des mesures concrètes. Et notamment, la première mesure, c'est de mettre l'accès à l'eau potable et à l'assainissement dans le top agenda et au niveau de la budgétisation. Donc on doit avoir les budgets nécessaires pour financer ces services, quelle que soit la gestion dans le pays, quels que soient les problèmes de gestion. Ça, c'est la première source de financement durable. C'est de budgétiser, d'allouer les ressources financières. Et bien sûr, là, je suis d'accord, c'est le local, c'est le national qui doit prendre les décisions politiques si on respecte les décisions qu'on a prises auprès de la communauté internationale. Après, on peut compléter, bien sûr, par d'être source de financement. Mais la source durable, parce que ça, il s'agit de durabilité, c'est d'abord la budgétisation. Deuxième, rapidement. Une autre source importante, je ne parle pas en termes de part, mais une deuxième source qui est très importante de financement, c'est d'investir dans la recherche pour des solutions adoptées à ces pays en développement. Et il y a là une économie très importante. Ça a été abordé dans la session précédente. Les systèmes centralisés, surtout pour les nouvelles villes, n'est plus viable. Ça coûte très cher pour un rendement qui n'est pas très démontré. Et ça ne veut pas dire d'avoir des solutions low cost, mais c'est des solutions appropriées à ces pays. Troisième source peut-être de financement, il y a d'autres, mais qui est à mon avis importante, qui est propre aux pays en développement, aussi aux pays en développement, c'est le problème de ce qu'on appelle en français l'intégrité dans le domaine de l'eau, ou water integrity. Il y a beaucoup de niches également d'économie dans ce domaine, et on sait qu'il y a beaucoup de gaspillage parce qu'il y a une mauvaise gestion, mauvaise gouvernance du secteur de l'eau et d'autres secteurs. Merci.
Thank you very much. We'll take multiple questions or comments. I would like to stress that, I mean, nothing wrong with what you said, sir, but those were actually 3 comments, and I think there's so many people who want to speak that I invite 1 comment per person who gets the microphone. Sorry for that. And be brief, if possible. Okay, next one.
Thank you. My name is Marianne Chelian. I work with Stockholm International Water Institute. I qualified as an international NGO in this category. My question is about connections and the financing of connections. It's actually for the whole panel, but I think, well, the gentleman from the European Aid and Islamic Development Bank mentioned, well, staffing and presumably staff per connections. There, I think, well, first, like, given that we have this enormous challenge of full coverage, sometimes when we speak about staff per connection, maybe the conclusion should be not to reduce staff, but to increase the number of connections. I think in many places that is really the response to the issue. And that is, and in this sense, I think we talk a lot about like tariffs and if they are unaffordable to low-income people, but of course the first exclusionary barriers is to get a connection at all. And unfortunately, I think that connections are actually used sometimes as a way of financing. It's not the 3 T's only, it's a TTTC, because the connections are often not just cost of piping for the household, but also fees for connections that can be quite high. This is also an area which I think is a lot of integrity issues and corruption also. There is extremely high demand for connections in many countries, and people are willing to pay huge sums to be connected. Of course, those are only the well-off. So I think in terms of finding something that need further public or joint financing is actually connections, which would also actually expand the market for using tariffs. And many low-income people, if they could only get a connection, paying often double or more than double normal tariffs is a huge relief for them, paying alternative providers. So, so my question then, can we think about really financing connections in a different way? Some of the first-time connection funds we have finance piping up to 25 meters. When we have small systems, who lives within 25 meters? It really needs to be new thinking about how we deal with connections and extending networks in order to increase the market for tariff eventually. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see the third row. Yes, person. You have spoken already in the previous session, so I'm not discouraging that
Oui, mais moi,
remarks at all, but be brief, please.
Comme nous sommes en démocratie, on peut prendre à tous les panels la parole.
Naturellement.
Donc, moi, mon problème, c'est de dire aujourd'hui comment avoir des systèmes de financement durables sans bonne gouvernance, sans transparence avérée et une optimisation des processus. Ceci me paraît excessivement essentiel. Mais aussi, comment on va obtenir des sociétés d'eau et d'assainissement durables avec des tarifs socialement acceptables si la question de la tarification n'est pas maîtrisée, n'est pas étudiée. Et aussi, les modes de financement possibles, aussi bien en utilisant les bailleurs de fonds qu'en utilisant des financements propres aux entités ou au gouvernement. Ça me paraît essentiel. La question que je me pose aujourd'hui, on a dit que les sociétés de télécom sont des sociétés privées. N'est-il pas possible, comme à Guayaquil, de pouvoir instituer une taxe sur les opérateurs téléphoniques pour financer l'eau et l'assainissement? C'est Mamadou Dia, je suis le président de Aquafed, qui est la Fédération internationale des opérateurs privés de services d'eau et directeur de la eau et assainissement de la société Eranov.
Thank you very much. The gentleman here, yes, please.
Thank you, Martin. David Boys with Workers and Trade Unions, Public Services International. Martin, I'm sure you're glad you have a pension. You probably have a ABP Dutch pension.
Yes.
As you know, the monies that you are enjoying from your pension come from a strict regime of fiduciary responsibility with also a fairly serious assessment of risk-adjusted rate of return, which would make it impossible to invest in many developing country water systems for ABP. The risks are too high, or you'd need 20 to 25% return on investment annually. Also in the Netherlands, what you may have noticed is there's been a very serious look at how much the intermediaries are charging the pension funds for all the services, and the Dutch have done the first national requirement to reveal all of the costs that the pension funds pay to manage your money. It is massive. And so the reason I'm saying this is because we need to do the same in terms of the hidden costs when we're looking at the renewed emphasis on public-private partnerships. For the AFDB, telecoms is not an appropriate model to give for water. You can have many telecoms operators. Telecoms operators have very few social and environmental responsibilities. It is constantly wheeled out as, why don't we do like telecoms? Water doesn't operate like telecoms, does not operate under market dynamics or market rules. You cannot use simply tariff structures and market signals to adjust behavior. I would ask also, which country do you know has built a complete water and sanitation system based on market actors and dynamics, only on tariffs? Doesn't exist. Please do some homework. And Dick, finally on the SDGs, I'm afraid the Finance for Development conference in Addis is again relying on private sector money. You're talking 20 to 25% annual risk-adjusted rate of return. This is not feasible, guys. So we need to look at maybe what's coming out from Corbyn, some overt monetary financing of deficits to build the infrastructure that we all need to improve and raise our conditions. Thank you.
But then, David, no, I'll give Dick the floor later on. But then, what is the solution?
Well, I just
Just
raised
just one-liner.
I just raised one thing that you might want to look at, and this is what the new head of Labour in the UK is proposing, is something technically called, so the bankers might know it, is overt monetary financing of deficits, in order that we can create the infrastructure, whether it's water or energy or health or education, upon which we all depend to rise. And if we're waiting for the private sector to do it, it won't happen. It's too expensive, too many intermediaries, too much speculation. We know it. So let's actually use our own money that taxpayers pay, and let's look also at tax justice. Donors, please help countries build tax systems so that the rich and the multinationals pay their fair share. So two elements of an answer, Martin.
Clear, clear. Now I think, you know, we've been exclusively taking the left side of the room, so let's now take the right side of the room.
Gender equity, man.
Oh, sorry. We'll do that later. That's the next step. The next step. We had one lady already, by the way. Yes. Well, look at the audience.
Yeah, they're not speaking.
But if go to the other side of the floor of the room, please. So we'll take a few questions on this side of the room and then go back to the lady in the red dress.
Quick question from my side, Tomás López from UNICEF. Is to Mr. Nizar, no? You were stating that a key issue on having well-performing and sustainable utilities is leadership, no? And in regard to this key parameter, how to use or make use of this parameter, integrate this variable in the financial feasibility analysis that development banks are doing in daily basis to decide if they give a credit or not, a loan or not. No. If there is any idea about that.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I said Tomás López from UNICEF.
We take a few more questions on that side, and then the lady in red will be the last one, because we have already exhausted our time, and I would like to give the panelists the opportunity to come back to those who had questions with very brief answers or reflect.
Merci. Moi, je vais aller très rapidement parce que les modes de financement sont différents. Monsieur Guinoven a parlé, par exemple, de faire recours aux domestiques. Monsieur Assafo, il a lui parlé de l'exemple des télécoms. Et j'en passe, hein, il y a les combinaisons, il y a le type de... Mais malgré tout ça, il y a quand même des gens quelque part qui ne peuvent pas accès, par exemple, à des financements pour avoir l'eau. Est-ce que vraiment on pense à ces gens-là? Est-ce que vraiment, comme M. Mamadou Dia l'a dit, est-ce que c'est vraiment pas déconnecter l'accès à l'eau potable à une certaine forme peut-être de la gouvernance ou peut-être un truc de sans gouvernance pour que ces gens aient accès à l'eau potable?
Thank you very much. I would now like to give the opportunity for the last comment here. No, there's no time. I'm very sorry. Unless everybody agrees we'll sit here for another hour, I'd be happy to extend the duration of the session, but I don't think the organizers will be happy with that.
My name is Susan Spronk, and I'm a civil society. I'm a member of a trade union. I'm also a contributor to a public pension fund through my trade union. I work with the Municipal Services Project, and I would like to commend the panel for coming up with one point that I thought was very important, which is that there are different solutions in different areas. Emerging markets are able to raise funds, domestic resource mobilization. Sub-Saharan Africa is much more difficult. So we need different solutions for different problems in different places. But what I didn't hear were a lot of creative solutions of public financing besides domestic resource mobilization. And this was mentioned by David Boyes, but I will also underscore it. Again, the largest pooled pension fund in Canada is the Public Teachers Union of Ontario, which is my province. Currently, they're investing, unfortunately, in Chile, in private water companies. But I think there's more efforts that could be done in a space like this to talk about those public solutions, because there is money. There is public money. There's also a representative here from Norway. Norway has the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. Also, the major contributors is oil, but let's use that money for building water and sanitation networks, particularly targeting those who cannot afford to pay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry to disappoint many of those in the audience. I would now like to ask each of the panelists to very, very, very briefly react to the statements made from the audience. And I will start on my right side, if you're ready.
Brevemente, doy tiempo para que cojan los auriculares. Simplemente decir que me gustaría recoger muchas de las intervenciones que ha habido. Por ejemplo, el fortalecer me parece fundamental. A lo mejor como donante damos esa sensación, ¿no?, de que estamos ahí para financiar y yo creo que estamos fundamentalmente para acompañar a nuestros países socios en fortalecer el sector, fortalecer sus propias instituciones y crear servicios y soluciones sostenibles, acompañar a todos los países para que ellos mismos se puedan hacer cargo de sus servicios. Yo creo que eso es fundamental, que no dependan de nosotros y que la situación sostenible del futuro sería que cada país pueda ser autosuficiente en ese sentido, ¿no?, con los presupuestos nacionales y con todas las fuentes que se han ido mencionando de financiación. Nada más, porque si no, no da tiempo.
Okay.
Thank you. Dick?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for all your questions. First of all, if you didn't have a chance to interact with the panel or, raise your question, there's going to be a 2-hour session after this session on financing for WOPs, and we can really go into detail there. So don't worry if you haven't a chance. First of all, when we talk about sustainable financing, we talk about 20, 30, 50 years. We talk about the strategic, long-term financing for utilities, and that's not going to be on outside money, as simple as that. It has to be on local, domestic resources, and that's the key I want to make for sure. Second point is, don't look only at the utility. We have here Nairobi with 26 million PIP plan. It needs a financing plan, by the way, Farage. Just to have a budget is nice, but who's going to pay it? That's we have the next step, but that's also for the other PIP. The point I tried to make, there are about 100 utilities in Kenya. So we're not talking about project financing. We have to start thinking about sector financing. And in that respect, we're thinking if we want to tap into the capital market, we need to create some kind of a water financing facility to blend resources. The ODA we have should be used very strategically to areas and disadvantaged groups, and not to people who may be using the capital market or the credit market for that matter. So we have to think, and Kenya is a good example, there's a water sector trust fund. It blends ODA grant money with loans from the banks, which are loans actually to Treasury, and the taxpayer is paying, by the way. Don't forget ever that, because it adds to the sovereign debt of the country. So that facility can tap into the capital market by issuing bonds. The point I tried to make, our government has agreed, we are working with 10 countries, if they want, to set up 10 water financing facilities. Facilities you can call water banks. Banks that know the business of water and know the capital market and know the blending of resources, to be able to do a much better job of financing. Water has been not being able to tap into the water finance sector. As I said already, there's only one finance officer in the room today. We don't know much about interest rates and tenors. We're talking about loans, say, about 30 years, with relatively low interest rates. And we want to pool it. We want to pool investments, so make the risk of the investors lower, bringing down the interest rate. And that a water financing facility can do, in my view. We'll talk about that later this morning. Last point I would say, that's about, house connections. Why not microcredit? Microcredit. There should be microcredit facilities for latrine construction and for house connections. On the pension fund, 25%, David, you're absolutely right. Actually, there are utilities in Kenya now who pay 24% on a short-term 4 or 5-year credit from the commercial market. That's not sustainable, but they're doing it because they have to. We have to really to think of it. On leadership, Lisa, I fully agree with you. I'd like to point out to the back of the Kenya point, it's written threats, and the threats is called political interference. I think the key issue is how to get rid of the politicians in our water business. Politicians have a 4-year horizon, next elections. We're talking about the basic services, which are much longer horizon. Politicians, really, the tariffs, the issue that the politicians are dealing with, they are manipulating the sector. The earlier we get away from it, the better, I would say. Last point, loans from development banks. Fair enough. Never forget, there's no free money. The taxpayer is paying back that loan. Maybe a concessional loan, but finally, it's the taxpayer who's paying. And we see already big problems with all this sovereign lending going on for water. Mozambique, they can't lend any more money from the World Bank. Ghana has a problem. Kenya may sooner or later also, because the economy goes up and it goes down. And that is where, you know, IDA ceilings and IMF lending is under pressure. Thank you very much. If you want to know more, stay tuned the next 2 hours.
Thank you, Dick.
Well, I would like to reiterate one of the points I made previously. There is a consensus that providing water and sanitation services should not be free, though these are public goods. And well, the main issue is what is the right price. You just mentioned now that the policymakers, they also have a 4 years horizon. Someone in the audience say that investors expect a return if they put the money in this. So really, we have we really have to do maybe more research on the right price within each country. I mean, for each category of users, especially in informal settlement, and also the involvement of the private sector in the financing. I mean, this is laudable. Maybe in middle-income countries or in countries where I think countries like Kenya have a more sophisticated or developed financial system. This could eventually work, but when we talk about much poorer countries, maybe like Burundi or Guinea-Bissau or even Democratic Republic of Congo, where urban population is increasing very fast and living mainly in informal settlements, well, I still keep my, allow me to have some doubts and reservations. So at the end of the day, still we should explore, as most panelists pointed out, a combination of instruments. At OFID, we are using low cost loans for infrastructure investments, but we do also use grant financing for projects that target specifically underserved populations in underserved and vulnerable populations in some of our poorest, among our poorest partner countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the message which I want to convey is that, you see, we can't continue to burden the users by the inefficiency or the cost of inefficiency of service provision. So the lesson that we can learn from the telecom as well as from the power sector is that, you see, the service provision has to be done on a sustainable, on a efficient cost basis. As you are aware, the public funds and the ODA is drying. So we need to support the transformation of the sector to become more cost effective so that eventually it can also attract private sector financing. Of course, in the process, we are going to support or continue to support the development of the sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Question on the connections. Let's be clear, currently, the populations are paying water, and they are paying water to water vendors, which is very, very expensive, okay? So, and if we are doing a connection, and we're asking them, for example, to pay over 2 or 3 years in installments, I think they could afford that. So now, if they are very, very poor, there's always opportunity for cross-subsidies, which means people will be maybe getting coupons and the rich will be paying for the poor, or different areas. We always talk about cross-subsidies, but these should be very targeted. It's not like you target the whole area, but individuals in that area, because this is what. And there's, my colleagues were mentioned about telecommunications, and we always talk about people don't have money to pay water, but they always have money to top up their phones, to buy credit. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you go to the farthest places in sub-Saharan Africa or in Asia or wherever, they will always have money. So I'm really surprised by the debate always which comes in any conference that, okay, water is expensive and we give them the money. But when it comes to the phone, nobody asks for subsidies or helping them to pay their bills or whatever. So, and the question for Thomas regarding UNICEF, I mean, from UNICEF leadership, we don't do it in our due diligence, but I know our colleagues in the private sector, they do that actually. They ask for the CVs of the management of the company, and they look at that before engaging in any financing. Thank you.
Quick word. A bank always looks for a return on their investment, and so they're always going to look. The difference between a development bank and a private bank is the amount they want on the return on their investment. So therefore, they are going to look for where to invest. And I have to say that it's something that really surprised me, the difference in performance between operators within Sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, for example, the urban operator in Burkina is probably the only organization which has access to finance from development banks. And so for me, it's very, very important to have a performance, and I think the question of leadership is absolutely relevant to it. Now, I just want to mention as well that for our next programming period of the European Commission, the blending is going to be one of our main instruments. It's trying to leverage loans through subsidies. So it's really something that is going to be very much in focus. It's trying to encourage the financial institution to invest in different sectors, and if they don't see the return, to fill that gap with subsidies to make sure that the proper amount of subsidy is there. The ODA, I don't think it's going to dry, but it's certainly not enough for what's needed, and it's a drop in the ocean. When you see the ODA related to, for example, loans or people sending back money to their own country, is remittances, yes, the word I was looking for, is really a drop, and that's important. Related to connection, just one comment. I mean, it's true, we say it's really a question of tariff structures and a way of, an appropriate way of financing it. I would say for sewerage, it's even much worse, the issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's now 11:30 plus. But I've been told, that's why I got a bit more relaxed, that the next sessions will start at 11:45. So there's 10 minutes to visit the bathroom, and maybe a very quick cup of coffee, and then the next sessions will start. So they start a bit later than foreseen, 11:30. It will be 11:45. I'm not going to... I thank you all very much for being present and adding value to the session. And I would like to have an applause for our panel members, please. Thank you very much. Thank you.